Well, as most of you know, I love hunting public land, and I try to hunt public land somewhere, at least one state, every single year. Last year I hunted 2 states, Michigan and Pennsylvania. The year before I hunted Michigan and Pennsylvania. I've hunted Ohio for 7 years. There's always some place that I love tracking back on public land and looking for some big whitetails. And it's all relative. You know, when I go out to Pennsylvania like I did last year for their opening day gun season, that was my 19th season. It wasn't that I expect to shoot the caliber of bucks that I do here in southwest Wisconsin. That's why I say it's all relative. Out there I'm looking for a good 3-year-old buck, maybe a 4-year-old buck. Around here I'm looking for at least a 4-year-old buck and 5 or older sometimes. And so really, you know, you really need to set your expectations. And there's some great public land areas around the country that I see next to client parcels all the time that truly hold booner potential bucks. And guess what, folks? No one's hunting them. And there's a lot of reasons that people aren't hunting them. And I'm going to go over a few of those there and why, if you hunt with some of these tips right here, these 5 tips, that'll get you in place on public land somewhere, get you away from people, and give you that chance to find a big buck. When I go out to Pennsylvania, I know other public land pieces that aren't 13 hours away that I could go step into and have an opportunity at bigger bucks. But guess what? I love Pennsylvania. I've been out there. I've hunted there since 1993. Like I said, 19 seasons now. And so part of hunting for me, you know, of course I love to talk about shooting big bucks, finding big bucks, scouting big bucks, because that's a strategy to me. It's not very hard to find a mature doe. It really isn't, especially if you have private land. They are not the lowest hole in the bucket. A mature buck is. So that's where the strategy comes in. That's where the year-long planning come in. And so that's fun, the hunt, the part of it. It doesn't matter, I just lower my expectations, go on public land or raise them depending on where I'm going. But bottom line is I just love to hunt. I like to be out in the woods. And the lure of big public land areas really is incredibly attractive to me. So every year it's somewhere, and I've hunted public land since the mid-80s, almost every single year. I think I've shot close to 30 bucks on public land throughout the years, and it's there's something special about connecting with a buck on public land. And I'm going to talk about this first point right here. And really, you know, one of the ways that you can hunt public land deer, pressured deer, is you have to separate yourself from other people, from other hunters. And so point number 3, scout people. We'll talk about that in depth. But number 1, when I'm going to a remote turnoff, the UP of Michigan, Pennsylvania, wherever it might be, yeah, there's sometimes you have to follow a trail in that everyone else is using, but at some point I'm going off the beaten path, and I'm doing that usually pretty soon. And I want to make sure that no one's following me. So if I'm scouting during the summertime, I'm not crushing down ferns. I even like to clear patches of soil, expose sand, maybe like a sand trap, 2 to 3 feet wide in diameter. And I like to see who's coming out, how many different shoe prints are coming out. I like to find other people. And so, but part of that is covering my tracks. I make sure that I'm not stepping in those sandy areas. I haven't found someone else doing that on public land, but it's something I enjoy doing. Try not to step in some of those muddy areas, especially breaking ferns, crushing over vegetation on my way in. And certainly, definitely, I'm not leaving ribbons, tacks, glow sticks, whatever it might be, so that someone could find my spot that I've worked hard to find 45 minutes in, 40 minutes in, even 20 minutes in, or over an hour, and they just walk right to me. Last thing I want to do. Folks, learn how to use a compass. That way, in case your phone fails, we rely on the phone so much, or GPS. If they fail, if the batteries go out on there, what do? You have to learn that compass. You have to learn how to read a topography map. If you're in big woods, and you're in big timber that has a lot of topography and variations of elevation, then learn to look what a point looks like compared to what you're seeing on the topo map to where you're going to. Learn how to take a compass heading and go from one point to another and make sure you're in that direction. Learn how to verify those things. And so really by using a compass, when I'm on those big tracks, I'm wearing a compass around my neck. That's what I do. And I might even look at the phone. I'm looking at the phone. I'm looking at something like HuntWise, looking at the elevation changes, looking at the aerial photos, looking at the topography maps, and I'm comparing ways to get into the woods and out well before I step foot on land. And you can bet when I'm going into those areas and I'm scouting, I'm making sure that people don't know that I'm there. Really important. Number 2, access points. Now this is an interesting one because there's a lot of public land I go to that have very few access points. And it might be that you drive down the road for 3 miles and you're in between access points. You can see this area right here. Big public land setting, road going down this side, and might be an access point here and there, and then there might be a wetland here. And everyone's parking there or there. Well, I'm that one that parks here, walks down the road, and enters here over into a small island, have to use knee boots, and get up here to a series of ridges because there's a wetland right here that people can't cross. I'm going in the difficult way. I'm not parking where everyone else does, and if I do park where everyone else does, I'm walking down the road and cutting in between. So I might walk a mile down the road, and that's what it's about too. You know, those access points are pretty interesting because if I have an area that I can just walk flat 45 minutes and really just keep my head down and keep walking, it's not too difficult of a walk, you can really separate yourself from a lot of people just by putting that walk in and getting and putting a lot of distance under your shoes and then going back to hunt where you've previously scouted. I love those access points that allow me to get in a difficult way. One of the ones in the UP that I like to go on, you have to cross 2 beaver dams. So by the time you cross 2 beaver dams, and I did fall in before in the first one, but by the time you cross a couple of beaver dams, you cross through a small marsh that might be a foot deep of water, 6 inches, maybe just a few inches at times, and you have to use knee boots. By the time you take some of those steps, even if it's only a 20-minute walk in, you eliminate 90-95% of the hunters. So consider your access points, either taking difficult access to get in, finding a flat route that you can put a lot of miles under your shoes before you get in, and never underestimate the ability for you to get in between parking areas. And it might only be that you're walking in 5-10 minutes, but there's a parking area 1.5 miles that way, there's another parking area 2 miles that way, and you're coming in between by either walking down the road or having someone drop you off, areas that you can't park alongside the road. And it's amazing how you can go in 10 minutes, and because it's not near a parking area, you're only 10 minutes off the road, 5 minutes off the road, you can find exceptional hunting because you're learning and understanding those access points. Always consider that backdoor approach too, where you have a lot of people coming in on one side of the woods, hardwoods. You can go around the difficult way, maybe even a difficult way to get back your truck back into, a long ways to walk. You're coming through swamp, coming through water, and you're coming into an area where you have several hundred acres in front of you or more, with people coming in access points 1 mile away in almost every direction, where you can get into that middle, wait for those deer to come back to you in the morning. And that's how I'm shooting the majority of my bucks, is getting into those areas, whether it's a difficult access, a long access, or a long walk in, and then putting myself in between where a lot of people are hunting, where I'm hunting in the middle. I don't see a lot of hunters ever on public land. And there's always good public land within an hour, 2 hours of every person, almost in every state in the entire country. You just have to work a little bit to find it. Number 3, scout people. So important. Whether it's trash, tree stands, old blinds, footprints, beat down trails, ribbons, tacks, anything that equals people, anything that equals other hunters, I strictly like to avoid. And so a lot of times when I'm scouting public land, I'm looking for old sign. A history of sign is very important. So I'm looking for remote areas, which we talk about narrowing down, but I'm looking for remote areas that fit the keys, fit the different habitat changes that I can walk into. And then I'm looking for a history of sign that shows a buck has been in that area for a decade or more, or different bucks have laid down sign in the same locations because they fit the lay of the land, they fit the movements that you're looking for. And I'm going in there and I'm verifying that sign, but number 1 or number 2, whichever way you look at it, I want sign, but I want to see that there's no people in there. And so a lot of hunters leave a lot of sign when they're going in and out of the woods. And it might not even be, it's not that they're leaving trash. It's just that you can tell they've been there. In the old days, they're really notching out of trees. There's still notches in trees and some old spruce swamps in the UP that I know of that were probably put there 30, 40 years ago. Because that's how hunters went in and out of the woods regularly, and they left their sign, they left their mark. So really learn to scout people as much as deer. And if you put those two together and you find a remote location, you find that history of sign, you find a lack of people, you're probably going to enter into a great spot to hunt. It seems obvious, folks, but you have to have those keys to find it. Number 4, when I'm initially scouting a place, really spend the majority of your time hunting by air. You can compare different aerial photos. I happen to like the HuntWise. It's a lot lighter, but there's some really good ones out there. Another one I spend a lot of time as a U.S. topo map. It shows the U.S. topo lines, the topography lines on a national forest overlay or state land, public land, and you can really narrow down just looking at the topography. So if I have a lot of topography in an area, you look at the aerial photo and it's on a big chunk of public land, if there's no clear cuts, you're not going to see a lot of difference in land. What's really cool with topography and aerial photos, you can see the dark shaded side of the hill. So you can see ridge lines, hills. You just have to stare it up for a while and figure it out. But even on just a monoculture, a forest, as long as there's hills in there, you can see those shadows. At the same time though, when you're just looking at topography, you can narrow down those great benches and saddles where you might be heading, and you can do it all from the comfort of your living room chair while watching TV. You're just looking through scouting by air. And what's so nice about scouting by air is that you don't have to spend days and days and weekends scouting by foot. If you think about it, you use scouting by foot to verify what you've found in the air, not the other way around. If you're looking for a good spot and you're just walking around looking for it, saying, yeah, this is a good spot, and then you look at the aerial photo, you're just wasting hours and hours or days and days of time. Always scout by air, then scout by foot. That's the most efficient way to do it. If you're just wandering around by foot, you're not going to have a purpose. You'll probably get into other hunting sign. I know like in the UP of Michigan, some of those big areas where they allow baiting, when you're walking through the woods and you're in a remote area and you find a bunch of sign, a lot of rubs, a lot of scrapes, you look for the nearest bait pile. But when you're looking on the aerial photo, you're verifying areas that people shouldn't be bringing bait into a certain area, even if you're in a baiting state. And what helped me a lot in the past is the UP, it helped me break down areas, is I would take cards of a US topo type map. It would show the little islands. And I would take, you could do this with an aerial photo, and you're taking that card and you're laminating it. And then I'm going out to certain areas in there, just spending an hour checking that off my box. So I'm finding specific areas that I want to go to. I'm looking for old sign. And that way I can be very efficient with my scouting. I'm going in, I'm just checking off boxes as I move around. This is where I'm going, go to this spot next. And even if I only have an hour to scout in a certain area, I can just go to one very important spot, go to another spot. And it was a great tool for hunting and just checking off the boxes, really. When I looked for a deer on Ohio public land, I found a buck that I shot with a bow. It took a little bit of time to recover. Just took a screenshot on my phone in the little simple draw app. And when I was looking there, I just kept coloring off areas that had already been. Same as you for scouting. It can be very efficient, especially when you're not spending too much time on your feet. And finally, what's really cool about an aerial photo, topo maps, and any type of photo and information you can glean on an area from the air is that you can eliminate 10,000 acres, turn it into 100 acres, 500 acres to scout. You do that by eliminating all the turnoff areas, eliminating the people trails, eliminating the obvious areas of big hardwoods where people are just going to wander from their cars and move around. You're looking for key features. You're looking for edge. You're looking for where a lot of edge comes together. And when I mean edge, I mean where a big hillside hits a swamp, where open mature timber hits clear cut, where waterways are naturally present, where you have various change in type of habitat, where it goes from uplands to hardwoods. So you look at all those edges. The more edges that come into one, you find islands out in marshes where deer, it's the only way they can travel through thousands of acres of marsh or wetlands. I love marsh and wetlands for that because it's very limiting. Limiting as to where deer move. Same with big steep topography. Deer aren't going to move in those big steep areas for the most part. You're looking at benches, saddles, points. So just by a topography map, aerial photo, and really getting to understand the habitat from above and looking for those changes, you can just start crossing off the people access areas, start circling those areas where all the habitat comes together. And because it's public land, that means you don't have the micromanagement of areas like we would in private land patchwork management. That means giant stands of hardwoods, giant swamps, lots of contiguous monopoly of habitat that you can X off and only look for where they meet And then that way you can take 10,000 acres, narrow it down to a few hundred acres, and by the time you look for a historical sign in those locations where deer should be moving, you look for the presence from people, you cover your tracks so people don't know you're coming in and out, you really pay attention to those access points, learning how to take a quick walk or learning how to go in between long distance access points. You continually scout for people in your public land hunting. Those are the 5 ways that get me into bucks when I hunt public land just about every year. I can't wait to go back to Pennsylvania this year. I don't know what other public land I'll hunt. Lord willing, I'll be out in Pennsylvania, maybe Michigan, in the UP of Michigan or southern Michigan like I did this last year. But I love to hunt public land. There's so much opportunity out there. I don't like when people say public land is shrinking, there's not as many good places to hunt. Folks, we have fewer hunters now than we did 20 years ago, than we did 10 years ago. The number of hunters is shrinking. If you put in a little bit of work on public land, just about anywhere in your state, within a couple hours of home, you can find some outstanding public land areas. I pass a lot of good public land hunting areas all the way to Pennsylvania, all the way to Michigan where I hunt. I actually have that connection to the land. It's not all about shooting big bucks all the time. I like the hunt. I like being out in a good hunt. And like I said, if I'm in an area where there's smaller bucks, I still like to hunt. If I feel like that 3 or 4 year old buck might be that top end buck, then I will happily shoot a 3-year-old buck on public land, even though I might not shoot that same buck here in southwest Wisconsin or another place, another high end where we're moving to Minnesota. Public land has that lure. I love being able to wander. I hope you do too. And I hope these 5 tips for hunting on pressured public land areas can help you this fall. And let me know about it down below in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. I also have a pretty large public land playlist if you want to check out other public land strategies that I've employed throughout the years, throughout the decades. Like I said, I think I'm in about 35 years of hunting public land, and I still have a lot to learn, and I'll keep bringing it to you, and I hope it helps.